Okay, Assalamu alaikum again. My name is Fatima Siwaju. I am an assistant professor of African American and African Studies at the University of Virginia. I am a proud citizen of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I hope everybody knows where that is. And I am really, really honored to be here with you. 10 years ago, when I was a master's student at Syracuse University, I was a fellow at IIIT in Herndon, Virginia. And it was one of the most transformative experiences of my very young academic career. And so when Sister Saula reached out to me, she was also the administrator back then. When she reached out to me, I actually was not going to come to AER, right? But because IIIT asked me, I said there is no way I could say no to an organization that has been so formative for me, right? So it is my absolute pleasure to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, this is the Al-Faruqi Memorial Lecture, so I will say a few words about who Professor Al-Faruqi was and his legacy. So Ismail Raji Al-Faruqi was a co-founder of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and the Association of Muslim Social Scientists. Born in Jaffa, Palestine, he completed his undergraduate education at the American University of Beirut. He eventually relocated to the United States, where he pursued doctoral studies in philosophy. Professor Al-Faruqi also studied Islam at Al-Azhar University in Cairo from 1954 to 1958. In 1968, he joined Temple University's newly established Department of Religion and founded the Islamic Studies program at that university. In 1973, Professor Al-Faruqi initiated the Islam section at the American Academy of Religion. He was also president of the Islamic College of Chicago. Professor Al-Faruqi was an exceptional scholar of Islam and comparative religions. He was among the pioneers who represented Islam in interreligious dialogue in the United States. He was a scholar who engaged not only the history of religion, but also the challenges of religion, especially Islam, facing the challenges that religion faced in contemporary societies. Professor Al-Faruqi authored with his wife, Dr. Louis Lamia Al-Faruqi, who herself was a distinguished scholar of Islamic art, the seminal work entitled The Cultural Atlas of Islam. His many publications include Christian Ethics, a historical and systemic analysis of its dominant ideas, and Al-Tawheed, its implications for thought and life. He was and still is viewed as a brilliant intellectual whose legacy of reform and scholastic efforts still reverberate today and will continue to do so. May Allah have mercy on his soul. And I will say that for all of us who are here, who are engaged in the study of Islam in the American Academy, owe Professor Al-Faruqi a huge debt. It is also my pleasure to introduce Professor Saleh Sayilgan, who is an associate teaching professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown University. He received his bachelor's degree in Turkish literature from Marmara University in Turkey, his MA in Religious Studies from the University of Alberta in Canada, and his PhD in Religion and Culture from the Catholic University of America in the United States. His research focuses on Islamic theology and practice, Quranic studies, Islamic ethics, Islam in America, and Christian-Muslim relations. Before joining Georgetown, Professor Sayilgan served as a visiting professor of Islamic and interreligious studies and as a Louisville postdoctoral fellow at Wellesley Theological Seminary. He's the author of several books, including God, Evil, and Suffering in Islam. But the book we're here to talk about today, and those of you who arrived early got your free copy, right? It's called Following the Prophet, The Life and Spiritual Legacy of Muhammad. Now, Professor Sayilgan asked me to say a few words of this book, and I'm not going to engage in academies, as you are all very familiar with, right? As a Muslim, right, as someone who's been a Muslim my entire life, this book is really a love letter to the Prophet's life and legacy, right? And in the pages of this book, it is obvious that this book was written by someone who deeply loved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I want to congratulate you on such an effort. And I also wanted to read something that really struck me, because what occurred to me as I'm reading this book is you must have had so many anecdotes to choose from, right? So the choices you made is rooted in that love, right? Because those anecdotes were so powerful to you. And as a reader, the power is transmitted to me, right? So in chapter 2 of the book, which is on the prophet's spiritual life and character, there is an anecdote that Professor Sailgan begins the chapter with when the prophet is at home with his wife Aisha. May Allah be pleased with her. And he's saying to his wife, you know, I want to get up and I want to recite prayer. I want to pray. And she says to him, "O Rasulullah, I love having you near me, but I also love that you worship your Lord." The prophet then got up, performed ablution, and stood for prayer, where he began to weep. He cried until his beard became wet. Then, as he moved into sujood, he continued to cry until the ground beneath him was wet. Later, as he lay on his side, Bilal, his companion, came to call for the morning prayer, Fajr. Seeing the prophet in tears, Bilal asked, "O Messenger of Allah, why do you cry when Allah has forgiven all your sins, past and future?" The prophet responded, "How could I not cry? Tonight, God revealed the verse of the Quran. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of the night and the day, there are signs for those with understanding." And Professor Sayalgan goes into a kind of analysis of the profound nature of the prophet's weeping, right? When somebody who is kind of inoculated from sin would weep so deeply. And he says, his companion Bilal's question, expressing wonder at why the prophet wept, despite being forgiven by Allah, reveals an important aspect of the prophet's spirituality. His spirituality is not only about seeking forgiveness, but also about maintaining an intimate and conscious relationship with God. The prophet's response, citing Quran 3:190, emphasizes the importance of remembering God by reflecting on God's signs in creation. And so I think there is no better analysis of a text or critique of a text or appreciation of the text than to read from the words of the text itself. And I want to congratulate you again for a beautifully written and such a compassionate portrait of the prophet. And without further ado, please can we welcome Professor Saleh Sayed.
Thank you for having us. And also, you know, to make a confession, this academic gatherings can be really dry. But having this really warm gathering and, you know, with generous food, we are thankful to Saulet and her team. All right, so really what I will do just to talk a little bit about the story of this book, really how it came to be, what I tried to accomplish with this work, because you know there are many books written about the Prophet of Islam, you know, for centuries, not just only by Muslims, by non-Muslims, you know, academics. So one thing is, I hope to really capture a holistic picture of the Prophet. So imagine, you know, when someone think of the Prophet of Islam, really, what should be the picture that we should have in mind, right? So and then also to reveal the picture of how he is perceived by his followers, right? How he's loved, how he is followed, and then to think of all of this as the expression of their love for God. So because eventually, as many of you know, that Muslims, they don't worship the Prophet, right? That he was considered as the best of human, but he was considered as a human, right? Not a divine. Another thing is I also wrote this book as a Muslim academic, right? Really, I tried to bring lots of my experiences, observations, even from my childhood, from the community, from the community that I live in, right, even today. So it is, and then engaging with various sources. So at least, you know, in my experience, observation, readings, there are like several questions that I like to highlight. Then hopefully this book can be an answer or engage at this with these questions, right? One thing is we see, again, often many sources, resources, studies about the Prophet is to basically confine him to the 7th century Arabia, right? So that time he lived, there's a history, and also to think of his life as a chronology, right? This is what he did, this is where he lived, right? This was his context, right? And then we, in this kind of studies, his spiritual life and character is often dismissed, right? We don't see really in the picture and highlighted. Although these are the most important aspects of his life for his followers, that if you really want to highlight anything, that this should be, it doesn't mean that, you know, historical context is not important. Of course it's important to understand anything. Actually, the context really matters. Someone, right, who lived the context, I mean, we know this is very important in the hermeneutics, right, how we interpret things. And same thing with the life of the Prophet. But this should not come at the expense of his spiritual life and his character, which is very, very central to his followers, right? And then we see actually these themes are, I mean, if you even, you know, whether from, regardless of the perspective, whether secular or historical perspectives, we know that the Quran is actually a major source, if not the most important source for us about Islam, the origins of Islam. This is actually the consensus of even scholars who has nothing to do like kind of with Islamic spirituality. So the Quran is the major source, and we see this is the theme of spirituality is a major theme of the Quran. And then we see it is linked to the Prophet of Islam, right? Same thing with Hadith literature. Actually, even if you look at any Hadith collection, you see the sections, the chapters about spirituality and rituals, again, are the major parts, right? It makes really a significant part of the Hadith literature. I mean, same thing with the Sharia books, actually. If you look at any Islamic law books, significant portion of it, I mean, you know, sometimes they begin with wudu, basically, with purification, right? So these are very central. And then all of this actually connect to the life of the Prophet. So meaning that if you want to study the Prophet, then his spiritual life and his character should be there, right? If it is missing, then it doesn't mean the study that you do is not important. It means it is not complete, right? That there is a picture is missing there, right? Another thing is lots of work that we also see about the Prophet really tend to be apologetic, you know, kind of. And this is not, I mean, we can say maybe this is more for Muslims writing in context, you know, just let me contextualize the life of the Prophet. So basically to respond to the controversies about the Prophet, right? And I don't know, I mean, in Turkish, there are two sayings, so I don't want to bore you too much. One is basically, it is, the phrase is, because of stoning shaitan, I couldn't do my wudu. So, I mean, in Turkish, şeytan taşlamaktan abdest alamadım. So the meaning is basically, because you have so many things that distracts you, you even cannot do the basic thing, right? And this is how I see some of the biographies about the Prophet. You know, someone says something, or another story is that basically a crazy person throws something in the well, and 40 sane people, they try to take out this stone. And the idea is that you cannot just exhaust your time, your energy with these things. Like the, you know, controversies will be there. And then actually initially, I should give credit to my publisher. I also had the tendency to do it. Let me get into the marriages of the Prophet. Let me get into his wars, you know, contextualize it, because, you know, there are lots of literature there. You know, this is maybe the easiest way to promote Islamophobia when you bring these things up, actually. I mean, if one thing is, you know, one of the public figure, I don't want to get into details, who was sadly assassinated, and then one of actually his last interviews was about the Prophet, and it was in this context that just it makes so much when someone engages with the something that's known as a controversy about the Prophet, it's much easier. But then it distracts us that now because of you are now so consumed with this controversies that you don't actually even cannot teach the basics about the Prophet, which is, you know, his spirituality and his character. And I see actually this is I see this in my teaching too. For a number of years, actually, I have been, Georgetown University has a program with the state prison system. So it's actually a signature program. It's very, we take it, it's very important, very transforming. So whether there or on campus, actually, one of the issues is really whenever we talk about the Prophet, the conversation is derailed to either about his marriages or wars, right? And again, it is so difficult to kind of, hey, people, actually, let's talk about the main things, right? So I try to really, and I don't really get into details about in this biography about the Prophet, right? And then the other thing is actually interesting. I mean, I would be interested maybe in the Q&A session, the Prophet in the dialogue circles, kind of in my observation, actually, it is often don't tell, don't ask, the Prophet, kind of. And sadly, in the literature that we have, academic literature is really, it's known to be kind of not a safe aspect. So don't engage with the life of the Prophet. There are lots of controversies, right? So you have this reality. And this is not the case, actually, if you discussions around, see kind of in terms of the points of dialogue, you see more with when it comes to, Saint Mary, Jesus, Moses. I mean, you see, actually, they can be the point of dialogue. And we don't see this common to be, with the Prophet of Islam. Again, at least in my observation, one example is actually, I thought that it would be kind of relevant to mention Nostra Aetate. We have actually a colleague who just was in audience with Pope Leo, right? So, and then last week, in October, we had a number of celebrations about Nostra Aetate being kind of a major, a turning point in history of Christianity, specifically the Catholic Church, in terms of basically when it comes to its relationship with other religion. But one thing is actually, and I tried to see, I had actually other colleagues to ask, the Prophet is not in the picture, actually. The Prophet is not in the picture. Again, we can say this is really a beautiful step forward. But still, again, the Prophet is not in the picture, right? This is lots of silence. And I tried to see if there are any other official documents of the church. I don't know, maybe in the Q&A session, our colleague, those who are experts can help us. But also, the Prophet is not in the picture, right? So, and I hope, with this work, so now you have this picture, right? So the controversies, apologetics, dismissing the spiritual and the literature about the spiritual life of the Prophet. But we see then, if you look at his followers, you see a different picture, right? So then now you have this picture, but then there is another reality, right? Growing up in a Muslim community, Prophet is everywhere, actually. I didn't grow up actually in a very, Islamically educated community. But one thing as a child, I can remember the first thing kind of, I was while writing this book, I was thinking, so what are my memories, early memories about the Prophet? So one is, I remember, you go to the mosque as a child, and I remember, I never forget this. When the Prophet's name is mentioned, like let's say the Imam is mentioning the Prophet's name, the first kind of, there's a gesture, like people are moving, literally. So they do, like when his name is mentioned, they put their hands on their heart, and then kind of they make a gesture, right? This is, and just kind of their love for the Prophet, right? This is, to whom you do it, just name is. And I know in some communities, people actually, they stand up when the Prophet's name is mentioned, especially in the, Sufi circles, Tasawwuf. I know people, they have different takes on this, but I take it as their love for the Prophet, right? So you have these realities, right? And then there is nothing in Muslim society that is not touched by the Prophet's teaching. There is nothing. It is difficult to make the point, right? As Muhammad Iqbal puts it, love of the Prophet runs like blood in the veins of his Muslim community, right? This is really how he describes it, right? And another thing is, another actually interesting thing, let me see if I, this is also from my childhood. Again, when you come, I studied at the seminary, I studied at Catholic University, basically engaging with different faiths, teaching about different faiths actually now. So this is actually called Salah in Turkish, kind of in Ottoman context. And it is actually when someone dies in the community, this is the announcement. To me, it's actually very astonishing, right? So, it's basically, it is, when you announce death in the community, you announce it with peace and blessings upon the Prophet, right? That kind of, this is a praise of the Prophet, right? And it's actually widespread. This summer I was in Istanbul, in also travel to different cities in Turkey too. I see, when there is a death in the neighborhood, this is how they announce it. It is by saying peace and blessings on the Prophet, right? So it's very common. In some contexts, you also see some of the verses from the Quran, basically kullu nafsin zaiqatul maut, so everyone will taste death. So you have some of the verses about death in the Quran, but this is the most common one, right? And another interesting, there is another genre, it's called Mawlid, basically celebrating the life of the Prophet. It's mainly about his life, his birth, right, the miracles. And this is, I remember, again, part of my childhood memories, when I go. And then, let's say someone died in the community, like 40 days later, that there is kind of a remembrance. And this is often, always, with the Mawlid. And it's also about the Prophet, right? So remembering. Another thing is, just in my observation, my students, whether in the prison or on campus, so usually they do a presentation, even if either they are on, in a class about Islam. And this, of course, they are not only, this is, the 99% of Muslims will be, students will be non-Muslim. And they don't hesitate to say, peace and blessing upon the Prophet. It just actually puzzles me. Just to make a confession, in the classroom, I take a secular position. So I don't go as a Muslim in the classroom. I am a scholar. But still, it might be intimidating just to take a different approach. And they are very comfortable to do it, right? Whether on campus or in the prison, right? And so this is the picture within the Muslim community, and then you have the other pictures that I mentioned. And I hope this book to be a bridge between these two pictures, right? I see there is really a wide gap between how Muslims, they love their Prophet, how they follow him closely, and then what we see out there, right? Especially when it comes to in kind of in the Western context. So in terms of my departure, really, it's like kind of to build a portrait that really transcends the kind of the 7th century life of the Prophet. I really begin with kind of my whole book is built on this analogy from a late Ottoman scholar, Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. So he also wrote a book called Masnawi Nuriya. So he basically links to Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And he uses the analogy of a peacock, in terms of why kind of just trying to find the Prophet in the 7th century Arabia, why it is a limited approach. He uses the analogy of peacock. So imagine a peacock, right? So the whole story of the peacock, the lifespan of peacock, his point is you cannot just look at to understand the story of the peacock in the egg, right? Let's say the peacock just emerged from the egg, right? But then imagine the whole span of the peacock, the whole story. And this is his analogy is basically, if you try to understand the Prophet only in the 7th century Arabia, you are just looking at the egg. The peacock itself is missing. And in another place, he used actually the seed of a tree, like a fruit tree. So the Prophet in 7th century Arabia is a seed, but then this seed is expanded, that became, throughout centuries, it has, the fruit of this tree gave, formed spiritual giants of Islam, Al-Ghazali, like Rumi, Ibn Arabi, right? So you have all these giants basically that kind of part of this the prophetic tree, right? But if you just focus on 7th century Arabia, the fruit is not there. Another thing is, for a number of years, I have been teaching a course about the problem of evil and suffering. And also, actually, my last book was on the problem of evil as well. But one thing I saw that this team is actually something that can, the campus is in a way manifests really kind of the religious landscape in the US. So meaning, you have a good number of atheists, you have a good number of agnostics, people of other religions. But the theme is actually is a unifying element. It doesn't mean that we find an answer. But one thing is that I try to highlight really kind of this aspects of the Prophet, as a very human picture that you also see in the life of the Prophet. Someone who was orphan, right? We call yatim in different languages. I think even the word in Hebrew is also used the same word, similar at this sounding. He is the one who he was a widower, right? He lost his spouse, right? He was a grieving parent. He lost many of his children. He he lost his grandfather, people who were instrumental in his life. So just to have this picture, like I also to highlight this. And actually, even this is anyone, one of the, a colleague, Kisha Ali wrote a book about the lives of the Prophet of Muhammad, I think, right? Is the book. Actually, one of the things that caught my attention is on the first page, like the opening page, she has this quote. I quote: "The standard biographies of Muhammad recount that 7 of his 8 children died during his lifetime. None of the miracles traditional sources ascribe to him impresses me more than his having survived such loss." So then this is again, and I think she also has a personal story like me, and then she links this, like this is how, again, I mean, at this, I read the book, but this still stays with me, that how she related to the Prophet, right? And then in terms of structure, I really tried to engage with different zones, cultural zones of Islam. I think, Professor Siwaji was generous to mention that I have my BA degree in literature, basically in Ottoman literature, Divan literature. So I also bring this, how the Prophet is actually a major theme in this classical Islamic sources. So this is the one where it says, anyone who speaks Persian here, Farsi, don't be shy. So this is, Chigham. So basically, what pain a community would have when they have the Prophet as their protector. This is right. And then, and what kind of fear they have, right? As Mawj al-Bahr, when they of this. The waves of the sea, from the waves of the sea, when they have Prophet Noah as its captain. So then he uses this analogy for the Prophet. And then, so بلغ العلا بكماله كشف الدجى بجماله. So basically his perfection rose to the highest, right? And then his beauty dispelled all the unveiled darkness. حسنت جميع خصاله صلوا عليه وآله. So basically, his akhlaq, basically his character, right, beautified, made everyone beautiful, and then peace be upon him and his family, right? So this is so Gulistan is my favorite classical work, actually, so I love it. This is, over the summer I had a friend, and actually, again, I share lots of stories similar to this. This is actually at the entrance of the tomb of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, a companion of the Prophet, who hosted him in Medina. So eventually, part of the Islamic narrative that he died, while trying to, during one of the expeditions. And then one of the teacher of Muhammad the Conqueror actually had a vision about where his grave, right? So once they discovered this, they built this huge complex. So there's actually a neighborhood named after this story. It's called Eyüp Sultan. It's one of maybe the most prominent neighborhoods in Istanbul. So at the entrance, it has this beautiful Ottoman, calligraphy in Ottoman language. I will read it in Ottoman, and you bear with me, right? So it's nice. Yetmez mi bu şehrin halkına, bu nimeti bari, Habibi Ekremin yari, Ebu Eyyub el Ansari. So basically, for the people of this city, isn't the prophet companions enough for them, by the creator, the body? Habibi Akremin, and he is the prophet, the beloved's friend, Yar, this is a common language, Abu Ayyub al Ansari. So he makes the point that basically, hey people, really for your city, you have the grave of this companion of the prophet. It should be enough for you. You should be content with it, right? Another thing is this called the Small Sharif from Topkapi Palace, the seat of the Ottoman sultans. And this is actually they do every Ramadan. So what they do, there is kind of a cloak, like the blessed mantle of the prophet, part of these relics in the palace. And then every year, people come, actually, including people of high ranking. So they give them this dasmal, called basically textile handkerchief, right? Mendil. And then on it again, it is about the prophet. And then many people actually they make it part of their will when they are buried. So they want this to be put in their kind of part of their shroud. So again, as a way to be close to the prophet. So they touch the cloak of the prophet with this mendil or this handkerchief as a way to get close to him, right? Another thing is interesting. I know that anyone who have been in Blue Mosque in Istanbul. So it's this major thing. So this is actually, it's very interesting. Many of the Ottoman sultans, they had what we call qasidas, basically in art. So poems praising the prophet. This is like many of them they wrote. We have the collections. And this is one is attributed to Sultan Ahmed I, who commissioned the Blue Mosque. And it is reported that actually he wrote this naat, right, this poem of praise about the prophet, and he would carry in his crown. And this is, and in it says basically that ne ola tacım gibi başımda götürsem daim kademi resmini ol şahı Resulün gül gülzar nübüvvet o kadem sahibidir Ahmet'e durma yüzün sür kademine o gülün. So basically what if I always carry the name, the footprint of the prophet in my crown? Because it is reported that actually he had it in the crown while walking. And then Kademi Resmi ol Hazreti Shahı Rasulun. So basically the footprint of the prophets of the prophets, right? And he is the rose of the garden of the prophets, the owner of this footprint, right? And he calls himself Ahmed. This is kind of calling himself, why don't hesitate just to rub your face to the footprint of the prophet. So this is how, again, another example how they expressed their love for the prophet. Another thing is, I think one of the thing I see in the Western context is it's so difficult to understand kind of the love for the prophet. I thought that this example will help. This is Princess Diana's black sheep sweater. Anyone heard it? And I was surprised to see that it's actually in an auction it went over 1 million. And actually I have a Sudanese friend, so Sudanese they know that they have lots of sheep, and I asked him how much the sweater will cost you in Sudan. And he said actually we'll give it for free. Like kind of the idea is that it will not be, in terms of material value, it doesn't have so much value. But people when they love someone, they will memorialize them. They will find ways to express their love, right? And I think when we see, sometimes in a modern context, lots of things seems that's irrational. But when it comes to love, I think people again, it shouldn't be so difficult to process it when it is about love. And I think if we just look at kind of the life of the Prophet, I mean, the way that Muslims, they relate to the Prophet, in this context, it will be easier to process some of the practices, rituals they do. Before the book, actually, I had like a few sessions just to discuss some of the chapters of the book. And in one of them, I asked the people, like in audience, I will not ask you because I don't want to intimidate anyone. I asked them, tell me, everyone, who is Prophet to you? They were it was a mixed group, lots of educated people. And one of them, people, they said different things. But one of them said, and actually I conclude with this story, kind of it's part of the conclusion. He said, the Prophet is the one who raised me. I said, how Prophet can raise you? He said, look, my father actually died a few years ago. The Prophet continues to raise me. And he said that actually everything, that the way I conduct my life, the way, as a father, as a spouse, as a child, as a member of the community, I actually base my life, I conduct my life according to the Prophet. And he continues to teach me. And to me, he's like a father. So it was actually, and again, this seems maybe a surprising analogy, but just given that how, Muslims, they closely follow this figure, it's really it's just telling, right? So and then another thing is the story of Layla Majnun is also part of the conclusion. So I'm giving you some summaries from the book. So it is actually a widely shared story in kind of in Urdu literature, Farsi literature, of course Arabic, Ottoman Turkish. So part of one of stories is a story of Layla and Majnun. Hey, anyone heard of Layla and Majnun? Yes. Don't call yourself Majnun, right? So this is. But the story is that basically, again, kind of the heart of the story that Majnun, his name is Qais, and he fell in love with Layla, and the family wouldn't let them, which is very common, right? In many societies wouldn't let their daughter to get married to Qais, right? And apparently Majnun, he's so much in love with Layla, he lost his name, right? His mind, and that's why he called Majnun. Majnun is basically bye-bye, right? So you are crazy, right? We lost you. But one day, actually, the Sultan of the time, this is again a story. So this is actually in Rumi's Mesnavi. The story is in Rumi's Mesnavi. So he gathers, he calls, because he also hears about the love of Majnun for Layla. So he's puzzled, like, why he's more people. He gets more attention than me, right? This is the story of Layla, sultans, right? They don't want anyone to have more attention than them. So he gathers, he calls, he asks his people to bring Majnun, right? And also he gathers all the girls in the town, like kind of in the area. He says, bring them all together. And then he asks them, bring Layla too. And then he turns to Majnun and he turns to Layla and says, to him, Layla doesn't seem to be really a beautiful girl, right? He says, look at this silly guy. And he turns to Majnun and says, what a silly guy. So, I mean, why, we have so many more beautiful girls in the town than Layla. What's going on? And then Majnun tells him that you should see Layla from my eyes. Then you will understand me. So if you look at it from your own perspective, sorry, it doesn't help. I think this is maybe another way to really look at the life of the Prophet, right? So yes, there are studies, there are scholarship, but the perspectives of Muslims should not be dismissed, right? So then, Muslims, they make roughly 1/4 of our global population, and they love this person so dearly, very closely, right? And then what to make of it? I mean, you cannot dismiss this reality, right? So there is something missing, right? If you have this picture, and then on the other side, that he is known to be the most troubling figure in history. I mean, either perspective should be wrong, right? So both cannot be true. right? So that means that we have to pay attention to the Muslim narrative, right? That is, so I hope, I mean, we are still, I think, hopeful. Is there hope? I think this is, once I saw this picture, I saw that everything is possible. So, I mean, I am still hopeful that things can be changed, that I think the narrative will change. And I thank you, everyone. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
So please, can we thank Professor Saleh Sayyadani? Please thank Sister Salat Pervez for a beautiful organizing. Please, sister, thank you so much. And before you depart, as we're talking about people who were important to Islam in America, Professor Al-Faruqi, this is his memorial lecture. Please remember in your du'as tonight, Imam Jamil Al-Amin returned to his Lord tonight while incarcerated. Very, very distressing news, but also relief that he is with his Lord and he is no longer in pain. So please remember him in your du'as. And again, so Imam Jamil Al-Amin was an activist, originally a member of the Black Panther movement, an imam, a scholar, a thinker, somebody who really advocated for the rights not only of people of African descent, but for Muslims across the United States. He was incarcerated wrongfully. He also had cancer in prison and was refused release on compassionate grounds. So he transitioned, he returned to his Lord tonight. And I think, us remembering Imam Al-Faruqi, someone who was very active in the community, we should also remember Imam Jamil. Take care, get home safely. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.